Injured alien nurse, abandoned by her unit, heals the heart of a war-weary human medic.
The battlefield stretched into the horizon, a wasteland of destruction where the remnants of war clung to every inch of the scorched earth. Blackened craters marred the surface, interspersed with jagged shards of metal and the charred remains of once mighty war machines. A faint, acrid wind whispered through the devastation, carrying with it the scent of burning fuel, scorched flesh, and despair. Dr. Michael Carter moved carefully through the wreckage, his every step heavy with caution and the weight of countless ghosts. The bioscanner in his hand emitted a steady beep, its green light pulsing dimly in the smoky haze. He wasn't holding his breath for miracles. The device had picked up signs of life before, only for him to find shattered bodies barely clinging to existence. Or worse, the scanner had been wrong entirely, offering false hope. Michael crouched beside a twisted piece of wreckage, peeling back a sheet of jagged metal to check beneath. Nothing. Just another corpse, its identity obliterated by the chaos of war. He sighed, his breath fogging in the cool air. After years of battlefields like this, he had grown numb to the sights, but the weight of failure never left him. How many lives had slipped through his fingers? How many more would join them today? The wind picked up, stirring the ash into a swirling mist. It stung his eyes, but he barely noticed. He adjusted the straps of his medic's bag, overstuffed with supplies, though it always felt like he never had enough, and pushed on. Each step he took was a quiet rebellion against the voice in his head that whispered, "What's the point?" Then the bioscanner beeped sharply, breaking the monotonous rhythm. Michael froze, his heart kicking into a faster pace. He glanced down at the display. A faint life sign flickered on the screen, weak but present. Alive. He scanned the area, his sharp eyes darting across the destruction. The signal led him toward a mound of debris, an unholy jumble of crumpled metal and broken alien architecture. As he approached, he noticed something unusual, a faint glow, soft and almost mesmerizing, emanating from beneath a large fragment of machinery. "What the hell?" Michael muttered, stepping closer. There she was. Pinned beneath the debris was a figure unlike anything Michael had ever encountered up close. Her body was humanoid, but distinctly alien, sleek, elongated limbs that seemed too delicate for the brutal realities of war. Her skin, though mostly hidden beneath a torn biosuit, shimmered faintly with bioluminescence, as if lit from within. The suit itself was a marvel of alien engineering, crafted from some kind of living material that pulsed faintly with her waning life force. Where the suit was torn, it leaked a viscous, glowing liquid that pooled around her in iridescent puddles. Michael hesitated. His instincts screamed at him to stay away, to leave her to whatever fate awaited her. She wasn't one of his people. She was the enemy, part of the alien forces humanity had been fighting for decades. He had seen her kind before, but only as adversaries, never like this. Vulnerable, helpless, and dying. "Damn it," he muttered, his hand already reaching for his medkit. He crouched beside her, his pulse quickening as he surveyed the extent of her injuries. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, irregular breaths, the movement barely perceptible. Her eyes, large, luminous, and filled with an unearthly glow, flickered open, locking onto his. For a moment, they stared at each other, two strangers from opposite sides of a galactic conflict. Her gaze was a mixture of fear, confusion, and hope. Michael swallowed hard. "What are you doing, Carter?" he thought, but his hands were already moving. Years of training and instinct had taken over, overriding the part of him that demanded he walk away. He pulled out a plasma cauterizer and a sterilized field dressing, muttering to himself as he worked. "Stay with me," he said softly, his voice calm but firm. He wasn't sure she could understand him, but it didn't matter. Talking to his patients, human or otherwise, was a habit he couldn't shake. Her bioluminescent blood continued to ooze from a deep gash along her side, and Michael worked quickly to seal the wound. The alien material of her suit seemed to resist his tools at first, as if it were trying to protect her, but eventually, it relented. She winced, her body trembling beneath his hands, but she didn't cry out. "Almost done," Michael murmured. He glanced at her face again and was struck by the intensity of her gaze. She was watching him, her expression unreadable but undeniably alive. He reached into his bag and pulled out a stim injector. Human designed, it might not work on her physiology, but it was better than doing nothing. "This might sting," he warned, more out of habit than anything else, and pressed the injector against her neck. Her body jerked slightly, her eyes widening as the stimulant coursed through her system. Her breathing became more even, and some of the glow returned to her skin. Michael exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Good," he said, leaning back on his heels. "You're not dying on me today." She blinked slowly, her lips moving as if she were trying to speak. A faint, melodic sound escaped her throat, but it was incomprehensible to him. Michael frowned and activated the universal translator clipped to his belt. The device hummed to life, its lights flickering as it processed her words. "Why?" came her voice through the translator, soft and trembling. "Why help?" Michael paused, meeting her gaze. He didn't have a good answer, not one that would make sense to her, or even to himself. After a long moment, he simply said, "Because you're alive. And that's enough." Her luminous eyes flickered with something he couldn't quite place. Relief, gratitude, or maybe just exhaustion. She closed them again, her body going still but steady under his watchful eye. Michael looked around the wasteland, his mind already racing. He had saved her, but now what? She couldn't stay here, not in this condition. He would have to find shelter, somewhere to continue treating her wounds and keep her safe. It wasn't going to be easy, and he was putting himself at risk just by being near her. But as he lifted her fragile frame into his arms, her glowing blood staining his uniform, he felt a spark of something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of purpose. For the first time in a long while, the battlefield didn't feel quite so empty. And that was enough to keep him moving. The makeshift shelter was little more than a half-collapsed transport pod, its metallic shell warped by heat and impact. Michael had found it during a previous sweep of the battlefield, deeming it too damaged to house survivors, but adequate enough to store supplies. Now it served as a temporary refuge. It wasn't much, but it was better than open exposure to the scavengers and predators that prowled the wasteland under the cover of night. Michael eased the alien nurse onto a flattened section of the pod's floor, careful to avoid jostling her injuries. She was lighter than he expected, her frame almost too delicate for someone who had presumably been a combat medic in a war zone. Her biosuit glowed faintly in the dim light filtering through the cracks in the pod's hull, casting a soft, eerie luminescence over the interior. He knelt beside her, his medkit open and its contents spread out on the floor. Her condition was stable for now, but he didn't know how long that would last. Human medicine had its limits, and while his training allowed him to adapt to various alien anatomies, her physiology was entirely foreign. Her blood shimmered like liquid starlight, and her skin had a faint translucence that revealed complex, branching patterns beneath the surface. Veins, perhaps, or something else entirely. The silence between them was broken by a faint hum as her eyes flickered open. She didn't speak immediately, her gaze darting around the confined space before settling on him. Her expression was wary, her body tensing as if she expected an attack. "You're safe," Michael said, raising his hands slightly to show he meant no harm. The universal translator clipped to his belt buzzed, capturing his words and rendering them into a flowing, melodic tone that seemed to match her voice. "I'm a medic. I'm trying to help you." Her luminous eyes narrowed, and for a moment, he thought she might lash out. But then her gaze softened, and she shifted slightly, wincing as the movement pulled at her injuries. "Why?" she asked, her voice faint but clear. The translator rendered it in a monotone that belied the emotion behind her words. "You human. Enemy." Michael leaned back on his heels, rubbing a hand across his face. He was exhausted, physically, mentally, emotionally, but her question forced him to confront something he had been avoiding. "I don't care what side you're on," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. "You're injured. That's all that matters to me." Her gaze lingered on him, searching his face as if trying to decipher the truth of his words. After a long moment, she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was a start. Michael resumed his work, his hands steady despite the fatigue tugging at him. He cleaned and dressed the wounds he had missed earlier, careful to avoid damaging her fragile skin. She watched him silently, her expression unreadable, though her breathing was slow and even, a sign that the stimulant injection was doing its job. As he worked, he tried to piece together the fragments of her story. Her biosuit was marked with insignias he didn't recognize, but its design suggested she was part of a medical unit. The fact that she had been left behind during a retreat wasn't unusual. Even human forces abandoned their wounded when the situation was dire enough. But there was something about her that didn't add up. She didn't carry herself like a soldier. "What's your name?" Michael asked, glancing up at her. He wasn't sure if she would answer, but he needed something to call her other than alien nurse. Her lips parted, and for a moment, he thought she wouldn't respond. Then she said, "Liriana." The translator rendered it with surprising precision, capturing the soft, lilting quality of her voice. Michael nodded. "Liriana, I'm Michael." She blinked slowly, her gaze drifting to the medkit beside him. Her fingers twitched, as if reaching for something, but she stopped herself, looking at him instead. "Your method's primitive." Michael raised an eyebrow, unsure whether to be offended or amused. "I'm doing the best I can with what I've got," he replied. "If you've got any bright ideas, I'm all ears." To his surprise, she shifted slightly and gestured weakly toward the medkit. He hesitated, then handed it to her, watching as her long, delicate fingers sifted through the contents. She pulled out a diagnostic scanner, her movements slow but deliberate, and examined it with a faint frown. "This inadequate," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael sighed, sitting back against the wall of the pod. "Welcome to the human experience," he said dryly. "We make do with what we have." Liriana's expression softened, though it wasn't quite a smile. She set the scanner down and looked at him, her luminous eyes meeting his. "You risk much," she said. "For me." Michael shrugged, though the gesture felt hollow. "It's what I do. You're not the first enemy I've treated, and you won't be the last." Her gaze lingered on him, and he wondered what she was thinking. Did she see him as a fool? A threat? Or perhaps something else entirely? He didn't have the energy to speculate. All he knew was that she was alive, and as long as she stayed that way, he could hold on to the fragile sense of purpose that had kept him moving through the wasteland. The wind howled outside, rattling the loose metal of the pod's walls. Michael glanced toward the entrance, his instincts on high alert. The battlefield was dangerous enough during the day, but at night, it became a hunting ground for scavengers, both animal and humanoid. He would need to stay awake, keep watch. "You should rest," Liriana said suddenly, her voice soft but steady. Michael looked at her, surprised by the concern in her tone. He shook his head. "Not a chance. Someone's got to keep us alive." Her expression shifted, a flicker of something he couldn't quite name passing over her face. Gratitude? Pity? Understanding? Whatever it was, it left him feeling strangely exposed. "I will survive," she said, her voice quiet but resolute. "Thanks to you." Michael didn't respond. Instead, he leaned back against the cold metal wall, his eyes drifting to the faint glow of her biosuit. The battlefield outside was a hellscape, a reminder of everything he had lost, but in this tiny, fragile shelter, there was something else. Something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The days blurred together in the quiet chaos of survival. Michael spent his waking hours tending to Liriana's injuries, scavenging for supplies, and keeping watch for any signs of danger. The nights, though quieter, brought their own set of challenges. Moments when exhaustion tugged at his eyelids and the howls of scavengers echoed through the ruins, gnawing at his nerves. Yet somehow, amidst the destruction and the constant threat of death, they carved out a fragile rhythm. Liriana's recovery was slow but steady. The advanced healing capabilities of her species, coupled with the treatments Michael administered, had begun to close the worst of her wounds. Her biosuit, damaged beyond functionality, hung limply around her frame, its once glowing material now dull and frayed. Michael had improvised a patchwork solution, using strips of fabric and adhesive to cover her injuries. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. Their communication had also begun to improve. The universal translator bridged the linguistic gap, but the nuances of their respective cultures often led to misunderstandings. Still, they persevered. Michael found himself explaining human idioms, answering her curious questions about Earth, and in turn, learning bits and pieces about her world. "Your people," Liriana said one evening, her voice soft but tinged with curiosity. "You fight so much. For what?" Michael, seated across from her in the cramped shelter, glanced up from his rations. He had been slicing a protein bar into smaller pieces, more out of habit than necessity. Her question gave him pause. It wasn't the first time she had asked something like this, but tonight, her tone carried a weight that demanded more than his usual deflections. "For what?" he repeated, his voice laced with bitterness. "Sometimes I think we don't even know anymore. Resources, territory, pride, take your pick." Liriana tilted her head, her luminous eyes studying him. "You do not believe in it." Michael let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. "Believe in what? The war? No, not anymore. Maybe I did once, back when I thought I could actually make a difference. But now," he trailed off, gesturing vaguely at the ruins outside. "Now it's just death, destruction, and people like us trying to survive." She was silent for a moment, her gaze drifting to the faint light seeping through the cracks in the pod. "My people, we value harmony," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "Even in war, our medics, our healers, are taught to preserve life, not end it." Michael looked at her, surprised. "Even on the battlefield?" "Yes," she replied, meeting his gaze. "I did not come here to kill your kind, Michael. I came to save mine." Her words struck something deep within him. For years, he had been surrounded by soldiers, each one focused on the mission, the objective, the enemy. But here, in this broken pod with an alien nurse who should have been his adversary, he felt a connection, a shared understanding that transcended their differences. "Funny," he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "That's the same reason I joined up, to save lives." Liriana's expression softened, and for a brief moment, the tension between them dissolved. It wasn't peace, not entirely, but it was something close. As the days passed, their bond grew stronger. Liriana, though still weak, insisted on helping with the injured survivors Michael occasionally brought to the shelter. Her advanced medical knowledge far surpassed his, and she introduced him to techniques and tools he couldn't have dreamed of. Using a small, handheld device she had salvaged from her suit, she demonstrated a method to accelerate cellular regeneration, closing wounds in minutes that would have taken Michael hours to treat. "This is incredible," he said, watching as a deep gash on a human soldier's leg sealed itself before his eyes. "We don't have anything like this." "Your technology is rudimentary," Liriana said, her tone not unkind. "But your methods are clever, adaptable." Michael chuckled. "That's a nice way of saying we're good at improvising." Her lips curved into a faint smile, the closest thing to a laugh he had seen from her. It was a small victory, but it warmed him in a way he hadn't expected. Their partnership was tested one afternoon, when a group of scavengers stumbled upon their shelter. Michael had been out collecting supplies, leaving Liriana to rest. He returned to find the pod surrounded, the ragged figures poking through the wreckage with crude weapons in hand. Michael's pulse quickened. He counted 4 of them, 2 humans and 2 aliens, their loyalties unclear, but their intentions obvious. They were searching for anything valuable, and if they found Liriana, he crept closer, his heart hammering in his chest. The pistol holstered at his side felt heavier than it should have. He hated using it, hated the violence it represented, but there was no other choice. Drawing the weapon, he stepped into view. "Hey!" he shouted, his voice firm but calm. "Back away from the pod." The scavengers turned, their faces twisted with surprise and hostility. One of the humans, a wiry man with a makeshift blade strapped to his arm, sneered. "What's this? Another bleeding heart medic?" Michael tightened his grip on the pistol, his eyes flicking to the pod's entrance. "You've got 10 seconds to leave. There's nothing here for you." The alien among them, A hulking figure with mottled skin and sharp teeth snarled. "You're hiding something. We can smell it." Michael's mind raced. He couldn't let them find Liriana, but he was outnumbered and outgunned. Just as he prepared to act, the pod's entrance slid open, and Liriana stepped out. Her bio-suit, though damaged, still emitted a faint glow that seemed to unsettle the scavengers. She held the handheld medical device in one hand, its sharp, needle-like tip glinting in the light. "Leave," she said, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. The translator clipped to her belt echoed her words in a monotone. The scavengers hesitated, their bravado faltering. Michael seized the moment, stepping closer with his pistol raised. "You heard her," he said. "Get out of here." For a moment, it seemed like they might resist. Then, with a string of curses, the group backed away, disappearing into the ruins. Michael lowered his weapon, exhaling a shaky breath. He turned to Liriana, his expression a mixture of relief and exasperation. "You could have stayed inside and let you face them alone," she replied, her tone firm but not unkind. "I am not helpless, Michael." He couldn't argue with that. Instead, he smiled, a rare, genuine smile that felt foreign on his face. "Guess not." As the day faded into night, Michael and Liriana sat side by side in the shelter, their unspoken camaraderie solidifying into something deeper. For the first time in years, Michael felt the faintest glimmer of hope, not just for survival, but for something more, something worth fighting for. The stars hung low in the sky, their faint light struggling to pierce the smoky veil left behind by the war. Inside the shelter, the quiet hummed with an unspoken tension. Michael leaned against the cold metal wall, the edge of his pistol visible in its holster, his gaze fixed on the glow of the portable lantern. Beside him, Liriana sat cross-legged, her alien frame impossibly elegant even in exhaustion. Her breathing was steady, a small comfort after the chaos of the day. Michael broke the silence first. "That was risky, stepping out like that." His voice was calm, but edged with concern. Liriana turned her luminous eyes to him, her expression unreadable. "They would not have left without a show of force," she said. "You needed help." He studied her for a moment, his mind caught between gratitude and frustration. She was right, of course. Those scavengers wouldn't have backed off without a reason to fear what they might face. Still, the sight of her standing in the open, vulnerable, had twisted something in his chest he couldn't quite name. "I appreciate the help," he admitted, his tone softening. "But next time, let me handle it." Her head tilted slightly, the faintest hint of amusement in her gaze. "You protect others without hesitation, yet you bristle when someone protects you." A curious contradiction. Michael smirked, shaking his head. "Maybe I'm just stubborn." "Undoubtedly," she replied, her voice tinged with humor. It was a rare moment of levity, and Michael found himself holding on to it longer than he expected. He had spent so much of his life surrounded by grim determination and hollow optimism that the simple act of sharing a quiet laugh felt almost alien. He glanced at her, taking in the faint glow of her skin and the calm, steady presence she exuded, and wondered how someone like her had ended up in a war zone. "What about you?" he asked. "How does someone with your philosophy end up here in the middle of all this?" Liriana's gaze drifted to the floor. For a long moment, she said nothing, her expression distant. "I did not choose this," she said finally, her voice quieter than usual. "My people value harmony above all else. Even in war, we strive to heal, to protect. But sometimes harmony is a luxury we cannot afford." Her words hung heavy in the air. Michael wanted to press further, to understand what had driven her to this point, but something in her tone stopped him. He knew the weight of guilt too well, the way it could hollow a person out from the inside. Instead, he leaned back and let the silence settle between them. After a while, Liriana spoke again. "Do you ever wonder if there's a way to end this?" she asked, her voice thoughtful. "Not just the battles, but the war itself?" Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I used to," he admitted. "Back when I thought it was about something bigger, something worth fighting for. But now it just feels like we're stuck in a loop, killing each other because we don't know how to stop." Liriana's eyes softened, her gaze fixed on him. It does not have to be that way. Her words were simple, but there was a conviction behind them that caught Michael off guard. He wanted to believe her, wanted to hold on to the idea that peace was still possible, but the weight of his experiences made it hard. Easier said than done, he muttered. Perhaps, she said, but it begins with understanding. Even small acts of kindness can ripple outward. Michael shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping him. Kindness doesn't win wars. No, she agreed, but it can end them. The conversation lingered in Michael's mind long after they fell into silence. He watched Liriana as she closed her eyes, her breathing slowing as she drifted into sleep. There was something about her, something that made him want to believe in the possibility of a better future. But belief was a fragile thing, and he had learned long ago not to put too much stock in it. The next morning, they began to piece together a plan. Their supplies were running low, and the shelter, though adequate for the moment, wouldn't hold up against a determined attack. They needed to move. Liriana, now strong enough to stand for short periods, insisted on helping, her determination unshaken despite her injuries. As they packed what little they had, Michael noticed a small device in Liriana's hands, a sleek, oval-shaped object that pulsed faintly with light. "What's that?" he asked. "A meditation stone," she replied, holding it out to him. "It is a tool for focus and calm." Michael raised an eyebrow. "I don't think I've ever been accused of being calm." Liriana's lips curved into a faint smile. "Perhaps you should try." She pressed the stone into his hand, her fingers brushing against his. The contact was brief, but it lingered in his mind as he turned the device over, examining its smooth surface. It didn't seem like much, but when he held it, a faint warmth spread through his palm, soothing in a way he couldn't quite explain. "Thanks," he said, slipping the stone into his pocket. He wasn't sure he believed in its effectiveness, but something about the gesture made him want to hold on to it. They set out that afternoon, their pace slow but steady. The battlefield stretched out before them, a grim landscape of twisted metal and scorched earth. Liriana leaned on Michael for support, her steps unsteady but determined. As they walked, they talked about their worlds, their pasts, their hopes for the future. The conversation was tentative at first, but it grew easier with each passing hour, the distance between them shrinking with every word. By the time they found a new shelter, a half-buried bunker hidden beneath a collapsed structure, Michael realized something had changed. He couldn't quite put it into words, but the weight he had carried for so long felt a little lighter, the darkness a little less suffocating. As they settled in for the night, Michael glanced at Liriana, her luminous eyes reflecting the faint light of the stars visible through a crack in the ceiling. For the first time in years, he felt something stir in his chest, a spark of hope, fragile but real. "You're different," he said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Liriana turned to him, her expression calm but curious. "Different?" "Yeah," he said, searching for the right words. "You make me think maybe we can do better than this. All of us." Her gaze softened, and for a moment, the weight of the war seemed to fade. "Perhaps we can," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "If we choose to." Michael didn't reply, but as he leaned back against the bunker wall, he found himself holding on to that thought. For the first time in a long while, the future didn't seem so bleak. And that, he decided, was enough to keep moving forward. The bunker was a relic of an older conflict, long abandoned but still functional enough to serve as shelter. Its walls were reinforced with thick, rusted metal, and its entrance was camouflaged by the overgrowth of alien vegetation that had crept across the ruins. Inside, the air was cool and damp, carrying the faint metallic tang of disuse. Michael and Liriana had found it by chance, stumbling across its entrance while avoiding a patrol of drones that still lingered in the area. Michael crouched by the door, his ears straining to catch any sound beyond the bunker's walls. It had been hours since they'd heard the distant whirring of the drones, but he couldn't shake the unease that clung to him. He had learned long ago that silence didn't always mean safety. "It seems clear," he said at last, rising to his feet. His eyes flicked to Liriana, who was seated on a low bench against the far wall. She was examining one of her medical devices, her luminous fingers moving deftly over its controls. She looked up at him, her gaze calm but sharp. "You are tense." Michael huffed a quiet laugh. "I'm always tense." Occupational hazard. Liriana tilted her head, the faintest hint of a smile on her lips. "You do not need to carry this alone," she said, her voice soft but firm. "We are a team now." The words caught Michael off guard, and for a moment, he didn't know how to respond. He wasn't used to relying on others, especially not in situations like this. But as he looked at her, her expression steady and sincere, he realized that she meant it. She wasn't just saying what she thought he wanted to hear. She truly believed they were in this together. He nodded, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "Thanks," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "I'm not great at letting people help, but I'll try." Liriana inclined her head, her gaze warm. "That is all I ask." Their uneasy peace was interrupted by the distant sound of something heavy shifting outside. Michael's head snapped toward the entrance, his hand instinctively moving to the pistol at his side. Liriana froze, her luminous eyes narrowing as she focused on the sound. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael moved to the small viewport near the door, peering through the grime-covered glass. The vegetation outside obscured much of the landscape, but he could make out shapes moving in the distance, hulking figures that were too large to be human. "Scavengers," he murmured. "Big ones." Liriana rose to her feet, her movements fluid despite her lingering injuries. "Are they a threat?" Michael nodded grimly. "Always." The scavengers were an assortment of creatures, alien and human alike, who prowled the battlefields in search of anything they could claim. They were ruthless, driven by desperation and greed, and they wouldn't hesitate to kill if it meant securing their prize. Michael had encountered them before, and he knew better than to underestimate them. "They haven't spotted us yet," he said, stepping away from a viewport. "But if they get too close..." Liriana's gaze sharpened. "We must prepare." Together, they moved quickly but quietly, securing the bunker as best they could. Michael checked the door's locking mechanism, reinforcing it with a heavy piece of debris they had dragged inside earlier. Liriana gathered her medical supplies, tucking them into a small bag that could be carried easily if they needed to flee. The scavengers drew closer, their guttural voices and heavy footsteps echoing through the air. Michael's pulse quickened as he listened, his grip tightening on the pistol. He glanced at Liriana, who was crouched behind a stack of crates, her expression calm but focused. "Stay back," he whispered. "If they get through, I'll handle it." Liriana frowned, her luminous eyes flashing. "We are a team," she said, her tone firm. "I will not hide while you risk yourself." Michael opened his mouth to argue, but the look in her eyes stopped him. There was no fear there, only determination. He sighed, nodding reluctantly. "Fine, but stay behind me." The scavengers reached the bunker, their voices growing louder as they inspected the entrance. Michael held his breath, his heart hammering in his chest. He could hear them testing the door, the metal creaking under the weight of their probing. Time seemed to stretch, each second an eternity. And then, with a sharp crack, the door gave way. The scavengers burst into the bunker, their weapons raised and their eyes scanning for prey. Michael fired the first shot, the sharp retort of the pistol echoing through the confined space. One of the scavengers, a towering alien with jagged, armor-like skin, staggered back, a smoking wound in its chest. The others charged, their movements fast and chaotic. Michael fired again, taking down another, but they were closing the distance too quickly. He barely had time to register the movement as Liriana stepped forward, her medical device in hand. With a swift motion, she activated the device, its needle-like tip glowing with a sharp electric charge. She moved with precision, striking the nearest scavenger in the neck. The creature howled, collapsing to the ground as its body convulsed. Michael took advantage of the opening, firing at the remaining scavengers. The fight was brutal and quick, the confined space amplifying every sound, every motion. When it was over, the bunker was silent once more, the scavengers lying motionless on the floor. Michael lowered his pistol, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He turned to Liriana, who was crouched beside one of the fallen scavengers, her device still in hand. Her expression was calm, but there was a hardness in her eyes that he hadn't seen before. "You okay?" he asked, his voice rough. She looked up at him, her gaze softening. "I am unharmed," she said. "And you?" "I'll live," he said, managing a faint smile. You handled yourself pretty well." Liriana straightened, the faintest hint of pride in her expression. "I am a healer," she said, "but I will not stand by while harm comes to those I care for." The words caught Michael off guard, and for a moment, he didn't know what to say. He nodded, his throat tight. "Thanks," he said finally, "for having my back." She inclined her head, her gaze steady. "Always." As they worked together to secure the bunker once more, Michael couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. Liriana wasn't just a skilled medic. She was a survivor, a fighter, and, in her own way, a beacon of hope. For the first time in years, he felt like he wasn't alone. And in the midst of the chaos, that made all the difference. The bunker had grown eerily quiet in the aftermath of the fight, the silence pressing down like a weight. Michael worked methodically, dragging the bodies of the scavengers outside and concealing them beneath the twisted remnants of a fallen vehicle. The last thing they needed was the smell of death attracting predators, or worse, more scavengers. His muscles ached with every movement, the adrenaline that had carried him through the fight now replaced by bone-deep exhaustion. Inside, Liriana was tending to the aftermath in her own way. She had salvaged what she could from the scavengers' gear, sorting through their crude weapons and meager supplies. Most of it was junk, sharpened scrap metal and rations that had long since passed their expiration dates, but a few items showed promise. A small power cell, surprisingly intact, hummed faintly in her hands as she examined it. "This could be useful," she said, her voice calm as she set the power cell aside. Michael stepped back into the bunker, wiping his hands on his pants. "Useful how?" he asked, his tone more curious than skeptical. Liriana gestured to her damaged medical device, the one she had used during the fight. "The energy reserves are nearly depleted. This cell could restore partial functionality." Michael nodded, his eyes lingering on her as she worked. Despite everything they had been through, she carried herself with a quiet grace that he found both impressive and humbling. Her hands moved deftly, her focus unshakable as she connected the power cell to the device. It emitted a faint whirring sound, the glow of its needle tip brightening slightly. "Good as new?" he asked, leaning against the wall. "Not quite," she replied, glancing up at him. "But it will suffice." Michael managed a faint smile, though his mind was already racing ahead. The bunker wasn't safe, not long-term. Anyway, the scavengers had found them once, and it was only a matter of time before someone else did. They needed a plan, something that would take them beyond the endless cycle of hiding and fighting. "I think we need to move," he said, his voice breaking the quiet. "This place isn't going to hold up if more of them come back." Liriana nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Agreed. But where will we go?" Michael hesitated. The question was a good one, and he didn't have an answer. The battlefield stretched for miles in every direction, a desolate wasteland dotted with the ruins of war. Resources were scarce, and danger lurked around every corner. But they couldn't stay here, not if they wanted to survive. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, "about the signal we found in that scavenger's pack. It's a distress beacon, right? What if we use it to call for help?" Liriana's gaze sharpened, her eyes narrowing slightly. "And risk attracting the wrong kind of attention?" "I know it's a gamble," Michael admitted. "But it's better than staying here, waiting for the next group of scavengers to show up." Liriana was silent for a long moment, her luminous eyes studying him. He could see the wheels turning in her mind, weighing the risks against the potential reward. Finally, she nodded. "If we are to use the beacon, we must do so carefully. Its signal range will be limited, but it could still draw unwanted eyes." Michael exhaled, relieved that she agreed. "All right, let's do it." The next few hours were spent preparing. Liriana fine-tuned the beacon, using parts scavenged from the devices they had collected. Michael gathered their supplies, packing what little they had into 2 makeshift bags. Every movement felt heavy with purpose, each task a step closer to a future that felt more uncertain than ever. When the beacon was finally ready, Liriana placed it on the ground between them. Its sleek, metallic surface pulsed faintly with light, a silent promise of hope or danger. Michael crouched beside it, his fingers hovering over the activation switch. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice low. Liriana nodded, her expression calm but resolute. "We have no other choice." Michael took a deep breath, then pressed the switch. The beacon emitted a soft hum, its light intensifying as it began to broadcast its signal. A few seconds passed, then a few minutes, the silence stretching out unbearably. Michael's shoulders slumped slightly. "Maybe it's not working." "Patience," Liriana said, her voice steady. "Signals take time to travel." Just as she spoke, the beacon emitted a sharp ping, its light flickering in response. Michael's heart leapt into his throat as he glanced at her. "What was that?" "An acknowledgement," she said, her tone unreadable. "Someone has received the signal." Michael's pulse quickened. "Do we know who?" "Not yet," she replied. "But we will soon." The hours that followed were some of the longest of Michael's life. They took turns keeping watch, their eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of movement. The tension was palpable, every creak of the bunker and every whisper of the wind setting Michael's nerves on edge. Finally, just as dawn began to break, they heard it, the low hum of approaching engines. Michael's grip tightened on his pistol as he and Liriana moved to the entrance, their bodies tense with anticipation. A sleek, silver craft appeared on the horizon, its design unlike anything Michael had seen before. It hovered just above the ground, its engines emitting a soft, rhythmic thrum. As it drew closer, he could make out the symbols etched onto its hull, symbols that matched the insignia on Liriana's damaged biosuit. "It's one of yours," he said, glancing at her. Liriana nodded, her expression unreadable. "Yes." The craft came to a stop a few meters away, its engines powering down as a hatch slid open. A figure emerged, their biosuit gleaming in the early morning light. They were tall, their movements precise and deliberate as they approached. Michael felt his chest tighten, a wave of uncertainty washing over him. The figure stopped a few paces away, their gaze shifting between Michael and Liriana. When they spoke, their voice was calm but firm, the translator rendering it into English. "You are Liriana?" "Yes," she replied, stepping forward. "I am." The figure's gaze lingered on her, then shifted to Michael. "And the human?" "He is my ally," Liriana said, her voice steady. "He saved my life." The figure studied Michael for a moment longer, then nodded. "You both have much to explain." Michael exchanged a glance with Liriana, a silent understanding passing between them. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years, Michael felt a spark of hope, a chance for something better, something worth fighting for. And that was enough. The silver craft hummed softly beneath their feet as it ascended, its interior bathed in a muted, bluish light that gave everything a serene, almost dreamlike quality. Michael sat near the bulkhead, his back pressed against the cool, smooth metal. Across from him, Liriana sat with her hands folded neatly in her lap, her gaze focused on the floor. The silence between them was heavy but not uncomfortable, a quiet acknowledgement of the uncertainty ahead. The alien who had greeted them, an officer of some kind, based on their posture and the markings on their suit, stood at the front of the craft, communicating with unseen allies through a device embedded in their wrist. Michael couldn't make out the words, but the tone was sharp and efficient, a stark contrast to the quiet stillness in the cabin. "You okay?" Michael asked, his voice low. Liriana looked up at him, her luminous eyes meeting his. "I am uncertain," she admitted. "Returning to my people under these circumstances was not something I anticipated." Michael nodded, understanding all too well. "Yeah, well, I doubt they're rolling out the welcome mat for me either." Her lips curved into a faint smile, the rare expression easing some of the tension in his chest. "You underestimate yourself, Michael. If they see what I have seen, they will understand." "Let's hope so," he said, leaning back and closing his eyes for a moment. Despite her reassurance, doubt gnawed at him. What kind of reception would they receive? Would they be welcomed? Or would they be seen as a threat? A human and an alien working together, breaking the rules of war that had been etched into the galaxy for decades? The craft shuddered as it docked with a larger vessel, the faint hiss of pressurized air signaling the connection. The officer turned to face them, their voice calm but commanding. "We have arrived. Follow me." Michael glanced at Liriana, and she nodded, rising to her feet with a grace that belied the weariness he knew she carried. Together, they followed the officer through a narrow corridor that opened into a vast, gleaming atrium. The space was filled with other aliens, Liriana's people, their bioluminescent features casting a soft glow over the polished metal walls. The murmurs began immediately. Heads turned, eyes widened, and the low hum of conversation grew louder as they walked. Michael felt their gazes on him, some curious, others wary, a few openly hostile. He kept his shoulders squared, his face neutral, refusing to let them see the unease churning inside him. At the center of the atrium stood a group of aliens in more elaborate attire, their movements deliberate and composed. One stepped forward, their presence commanding. Their voice was melodic but firm, the translator rendering it into crisp, precise English. "Liriana, you have returned, and you bring an outsider." Liriana stepped forward, her posture respectful but confident. "This is Dr. Michael Carter, a human medic. He saved my life when I was left behind on the battlefield." The leader's gaze shifted to Michael, their expression unreadable. "A human. Your kind has brought much suffering to our people." Michael held their gaze, his voice steady. "And your kind has done the same to mine. But I didn't save her because of sides. I saved her because she needed help." The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, but the leader raised a hand, silencing them. "A noble sentiment," they said, "but actions are often seen through the lens of history and conflict. Why should we believe you are different?" Liriana stepped forward again, her voice unwavering. "Because I have seen it. He could have left me to die, yet he chose to save me. He risked his life for mine, not as a human or an enemy, but as a healer." The leader regarded her for a long moment, their expression thoughtful. Finally, they gestured toward a nearby chamber. "Very well. We will hear your story. Follow me." Inside the chamber, the atmosphere was tense but calmer, the noise of the crowd replaced by the soft hum of machinery. Liriana and Michael recounted everything: the battlefield, the scavengers, the bond they had forged through shared survival. Michael spoke plainly, refusing to sugarcoat the grim realities they had faced. Liriana's voice added depth to his account, her words filled with conviction and sincerity. When they finished, the leader leaned back in their seat, their expression contemplative. "Yours is an unusual story," they said. "It is rare to find such trust between enemies." "We weren't enemies out there," Michael said. "We were just people trying to survive." The leader studied him, then glanced at Liriana. "And what do you seek now?" "Peace," Liriana said simply. "Not just for us, but for everyone. This war has cost too much for both sides." The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. Finally, the leader nodded. "Peace is a noble goal, but it is not easily achieved." "No," Michael agreed, "but it has to start somewhere." The leader rose, their gaze sweeping over both of them. "You have given us much to consider. For now, you are both under our protection. Rest. We will speak again soon." Michael and Liriana were escorted to a quiet, private room. It was simple but comfortable, a stark contrast to the battlefield they had left behind. As the door closed behind them, Michael let out a long breath, sinking onto the edge of a low bed. "Well," he said, "that went better than I expected." Liriana sat beside him, her presence calm and steady. "You handled yourself well," she said, her voice warm. "They will see the truth in time." Michael glanced at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You really think this could work? That we could actually change something?" "I do," she said, her gaze unwavering. "Because you have already changed something. You changed me." Her words caught him off guard, the sincerity in her tone leaving him momentarily speechless. Finally, he nodded, his smile softening. You've changed me too. For a while, they sat in silence, the weight of their journey settling around them. They didn't know what the future held, whether their story would lead to peace or be swallowed by the tides of war. But for the first time, Michael felt like they had a chance. And that, he realized, was enough to keep fighting for.